Welcome to another episode of Comedy Wham Presents with me, your host, Valerie, and sometime co-host, Miss Purrington. ComedyWham.com is your place to go for features about all Austin comedy. We bring you articles and podcasts featuring the best in Austin comedy in all its shapes and formats. We started the podcast project in early 2016. We love interviewing funny people and sharing their stories. I like to delve into a comic's background and motivations and will sometimes take a detour along the way. Consider the interview a way for you to get to know the folks that make the Austin comedy scene one of the best in the country. Today I've got a guest who is revered in the Austin comedy scene, from gracing our TV screens in the late 90s, to gracing the stages of comedy shows through the 2000s, to gracing the airwaves as one part of the longest-lasting morning radio show. Our guest is usually one of the first names you hear if you ask someone who's helped shape the Austin comedy scene the most in the last 10 or more years. And while he often deflects direct praise, he has been so instrumental in the success of so many others and has created some of the most iconic Austin comedy shows. I'm going to use my brute force today to finally get him to accept some much-deserved praise. And now Comedy Wham presents our guest, Matt Bearden.
Good luck with any of your plans, young lady. Good luck.
Well, since I know you probably have not listened to any of these, you know that...
That's not true.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Why you seem so devilish?
Well, just because with the whole notion of me using brute force, it's kind of come on, you know who I am.
Sure, absolutely. Of course I know who you are.
I have no brute force in my...
That is true. That is true. Well, I don't know that that's me, but you I think you can be convincing.
Yes.
But yeah, brute force is probably not so good for you.
Well, we'll see how this shapes up.
Now you have some French background, isn't that true?
I do. Well, technically Belgian.
Well, sure. Mm-hmm. Where it depends on where we draw the lines over the centuries, and the stereotype has it is that the French aren't the most forceful people in the world, right?
Yes, but they can be really obnoxious.
Well, that's true. Yeah. That's true. That's true. I want to really ask you about Belgium, but I'm going to leave you alone.
Yeah, you're doing.
I'm doing what?
I knew this was going to happen. You'd
What
end up
am I doing?
asking me questions.
It's my nature. I like to know about people.
You do.
I'll shut up.
No,
I won't say another word.
No, that kind
no,
of
we're going to look at each other for 40 minutes.
Okay, this is not the morning show. Matt, I like to start these, and I'm not going to break format here. I like to start with an icebreaker question, one word to describe your past.
Okay. Storied.
Oh, nice play on words there. You know, for those of you that don't know, the whole 90s on the TV screen was...
Then it was not even an intention whatsoever. Was not even an intention whatsoever. Yeah. Or I was going to go with the word conflicted, and then I decided that storied past just seemed easier.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
I grew up a lot of places.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure this out with my kids the other day because we were talking about schools and would they ever have to switch schools and such. I think I went to 14 schools growing up over 12 years, and I think that's part of how I wound up who I is. Mm-hmm. That's proper English, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And but I was born in Houston, grew up in Brownsville.
Okay, yeah.
Back to Houston, back to Brownsville, back to Houston, to Louisiana, back to Houston.
Wow.
Then Austin. And I think it's one of the reasons that I've ended up staying in Austin so long is that once I found a place to call home, I've decided it'll be my home. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know what's the best choice for me, but it's the one I've made.
Yeah. I've actually flipped. I was staying home one place for such a long time, but since graduating college, I like to move every few years. But Austin is so good to me and my family that I don't see myself leaving either. So I think there's a little draw of wanting the stability, and Austin is such a great town.
It's been a tough leave for me. I think it's one of the things that was so attractive about stand-up. The business is very different now than when I first got in it almost 20 years ago, right? Ooh, 20 years ago, actually.
I almost said,
crap.
When you asked in the last 10 or more years, I was going to be more factually accurate, but then I don't want to
You thought you'd be generous?
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I don't spend a lot of time, I think, adding up the years, but... Yeah. When I first, when I was in college, the whole thing was as soon as I get out, where am I going to go? Where am I going to go next? Because I liked traveling and going and dreaming of the next places I would go. Mm-hmm. I did go to LA for a while.
Right.
I don't want to say that I was a complete failure, but I would think I may have gone there for, I don't know, I want to say the wrong reasons. It wasn't a fit for me when I was there. A lot of people really shit on LA, and I really liked it. I wish I could have gotten back there. And I think my plan was, when I came back here, was just to sort of regroup, take into account a lot of the things I had learned in the just shy of a year that I was there, and then go back with a better battle plan. Mm-hmm. Plus, I wanted to start doing stand-up. I was not a stand-up before that. I did sort of a reverse thing. There's this weird thing that happens where stand-ups all moved to LA because they want to become actors. I was an actor, and I wanted to start doing stand-up. So I kind of reversed my way into it. I think one of the things that was so appealing when I got on the road was that now I got to do all my traveling. I go see different cities. And my intention was always to keep developing that and then move again, but life happened.
Right.
And so that, and now life is pretty permanent here, I think.
Yeah.
At least for the meantime.
Right. One of the things that I like to ask, because I think I certainly get insight from it, is when you were growing up, were you watching comedy or listening to comedy?
I don't think I was listening or watching, but I have a very clear memory of being in a Luby's cafeteria in South Texas. It was in Brownsville, just off of Palm Boulevard. I was maybe 5, 6, and I remember telling my Mimi and Papa when they were asking me, what do I want to be when I grow up? I remember saying a comedian. Now, I don't know why.
Interesting.
I don't, and it's not a memory that like I doted on growing up, but it's a strange, very clear, one of the clear memories I have from being a kid. Now, you know me, and so you know I also like to read about psychology and how much do we recreate our own memories or whatever. But it's a memory that I know I had even before I started thinking about being a stand-up. I remember having it, having this memory in elementary and junior high and high school, and I don't know. That's not true. I think probably why I came up with it is that I used to trade jokes with my grandfather. Now that I'm thinking about it right now, I think I'm putting it all together. I used to trade jokes with my grandfather. I really wanted to tell. He would come and tell me jokes. I would try to tell him jokes. You have a son. You know how bad children's jokes are growing up. And you also, it's funny thing is that you don't know why jokes are funny when you're a kid. Mm-hmm. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Ketchup.
Ketchup who?
Ketchup sink. That was an early joke that I had, and I still clearly remember it. I remember thinking, oh, you just put two words together, and then that's a joke. Yeah. Not realizing that, I think the joke is actually supposed to be catch up, son, or something. You know, the idea that that you're using the word ketchup in two different ways. But my brain didn't conceive of that. It was just like, oh, ketchup and sink are funny-sounding words, so this was supposed to be a joke. And so I remember telling him I wanted to be a comedian, but I never watched things were different, too. We didn't have YouTube.
Right.
The only way to really see a comedian would be HBO, but we didn't have HBO. And then when we finally had it, it was pretty verboten in my house. But I remember the kids, I guess it would have been 5th grade, kids all talking about someone named Eddie Murphy. And I had never stayed up late enough to see Saturday Night Live, so I didn't know who he was. I'm sure I lied and was like, oh, yeah, he's my favorite, just because that's what you do when you're a kid and you don't want to be left out. Right. You want to be liked. Yep. And we'll get past any pretending that I don't have a need to be liked, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be a comic. I know a lot of comics like to pretend that they're rational or whatever, but we're not. And so I remember getting a bootleg copy. When I say bootleg, I mean bootleg. My parents didn't know that I had it. So that's clandestine, should we say more? Or I bought a tape for Eddie Murphy from a kid at school. And then I had the tape recorder, the old black tape recorder, one speaker. You drop the tape in, and then where the play button is, it had the little orange button that you also push down to record. You could push them both down. And then I would tell my parents I was going to sleep, and after I knew they were asleep, under the covers, I would listen to that album very, very quietly, so that on the playground, I could also share the jokes and know what was going on and be like, oh, yeah, I totally love Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, so becoming part of the cool kid crowd
Yeah, so my introduction, if we're going to be honest, my introduction to comedy were jokes like, your girl will kiss a fag on the lips and go home without AIDS. That's what I thought was hilarious. It's funny now when I listen to that album in retrospect, is like how horrendous
Right.
it is. And then really, I guess, people say, well, the times were different. The more I examine that particular album, I don't know that it is funny at all to an adult. It's a very juvenile album, but I also am not in the business of completely. I think sometimes when you take jokes and you break them apart to see how they work, they lose their meaning and they don't work at all anymore.
Yeah.
I wasn't that way when I was younger. I loved taking things apart and I loved criticizing everything. You get older, you realize that your kids aren't going to be perfect, so you stop criticizing everything else because you want a kinder world, because you realize, we don't all have the same capabilities.
Right. You then came to Austin for school, and at that time you were pursuing a degree that was related or not related to
not
the
related at all.
ability to...
When I was in high school, I did a lot of theater classes, theater drama nerd,
Okay.
and or whatever your epithet was, wherever you grew up. And I remember being courted by a couple of, for lack of a better word, conservatories, acting schools. And I wanted to go. And I was offered some scholarships. I really wanted to go. And but the same thing happened. I really wanted to go. There's a school called PBA, HSPBA in Houston. It's a high school for performing and visual arts.
Okay.
Really wanted to go there when I was younger. And this sounds very conceited, but I think I would have a very easy track in. I did well on that kind of stuff. And but my mother said no. And in retrospect, it was she used the excuse, well, what if you don't get a good education in the other things? And what if you change your mind and this isn't something you wanted to do? And both my parents are loving parents. I don't want to ever paint them, but they have a lot of concerns, and they've never been comfortable with the way that I made my way in the world. Not out of rudeness or cruelty, but I think just concern. And my parents did not come from a background where something that you would choose to do would be, I want to tell jokes, or I want to paint paintings, or I want to write poems. Like, that's just so foreign to them. It just doesn't work. It's folly, right?
Yeah, that's a hobby. That's not a profession.
Right. My father was like a draftsman when he first started, and I remember going with him to get his college degree. It took him a very long time. He's dyslexia. Ended up being incredibly successful in what he did. He ended up taking over some companies and was an incredible manager, people person, but has a hard time reading and writing. And he came from people who had lived through the Depression and whatnot, and so it was just, he's a very practical. He was an engineer, Yeah. And my mother is someone who believes in playing everything safe. So that's what's always inside of me. I think that's why things like the LA move, when I looked at it, and I'm always the question in my mind is always, is this the right move? Is this the right move? It's a very loud voice inside of my head at all times, and it keeps me from doing a lot of things, because I think we're probably all a little more successful when we react very quickly. When you take the time to really think it through, you'll come up with lots of good reasons you shouldn't do something, right? And so that's sort of where I am. Came here for college, decided, well, I don't want to go to one of these acting schools, because when I get out, I'll have a degree that I won't know exactly how it funnels into anything, and I'll end up just working odd jobs while I try to do auditions. Yeah. And so I went to University of Texas, and I ended up with a degree that didn't really track into anything, and I ended up doing odd jobs while I did auditions. And it turns out that no matter how much planning you do, sometimes there's just something inside of you that you're not going to beat, and that's what's happened. And I will tell you also that all of my successes, and I'm trying to do a better job of inventorying my successes and being okay with them, if that makes sense. Yeah. They've all come through a complete lack of trying. So I feel very fortunate on a daily basis. You're making a face in me.
Because I don't.
I see people. I see people work much harder and are much more motivated, and they have plans, and I see them accomplish a lot of stuff. I'm proud of them, and I'm envious of them. Yeah. I think I've been pretty Like, I'm not someone who writes down, like, oh, I'm going to do this year, and then I put the pieces together and really hustle to get it.
Yeah.
I do this. Oh, man, that'd be cool if I could do that sometime.
That's true.
And
That
then
is your
sometime it maybe
personality.
appears, and maybe I put myself in the right places or something. I don't know. But I won't say that I have that laser-focused vision, though I don't know how many people that do what I do. Boy, that's a lot of do's.
What did it take, since you didn't have a lot of exposure to comedy other than that little recorder in the playground talk, what did it take for you to think about doing your first stand-up set? And I say this skipping several steps because you mentioned that you were doing auditions, and I actually don't know this chronology. Austin Stories on MTV was before you started doing formal comedy, or were you?
Yes and no. Here's a
Okay.
very quick, because I can get boring. The first stand-up set I ever did was in 1990.
Okay.
I went to go see a show called Esther's Follies with my dorm room. Right, we all went to go see Esther's Follies, and then when you left Esther's Follies, they said, "Oh, take your ticket stub down the street to the stand-up club." Well, as I told you, I've always had this kind of love affair with stand-up comedy. I thought, oh my God, going to a stand-up club, it seemed dreamy to me to go to a stand-up club. What's so funny to me now is knowing the inside workings of the Velveeta. I mean, I've been in and out of the Velveeta for 20 years. I used to work the door at the Velveeta. I booked the Velveeta for a long time and was a manager. So I know what a house of smoke and mirrors and balsa wood that place really is, right? I say that in a loving, very loving way. But I remember the first time I went, I thought, this place is amazing. Oh, it's so awesome. I remember all the first comics that I saw. I remember a lot of them by name. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this. I remember the guy I was with was a roommate of mine, and he kept making fun of some of the comics. Like, this isn't good. But I kind of saw them all as celebrities. I didn't realize what an open mic was made up of. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I saw them all as celebrities that night,
Yeah.
easily. And he's like, God, this person's terrible. And I was like, you couldn't do any better. And he's like, you couldn't either. And that's all I needed was really the motivation. The first set I did was really, really, really bad.
Yeah.
I did another set. I think.
So hang on, because so that first time it was just basically out of a challenge. So you hadn't not any thought
Really, to what it should be.
to writing material. You just went up there and you just.
No, as a typical open micer, I wrote all the material sort of the day of. It was really, really bad.
Okay.
Really, really bad. Props, a guitar. I had a guitar and props. It's one thing to do props or guitar, but I did them both.
Okay.
It was really, really,
Man.
really, really, really bad.
Only there was.
No, it doesn't exist because that's the thing is that back then you
right.
could make all those mistakes you wanted to. The other thing is that one of the things I'm envious of people who are starting now is there's so much bad stand up on YouTube that you can learn the mistakes before you ever go on stage, whereas before you could go and watch tons of stand up and learn those mistakes. But most people their first time out just kind of had an idea of like this will be wacky and funny, and it was all about getting attention. Not about being entertaining.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson to learn because I think a lot of us come from class clown backgrounds maybe. And so the whole thing is if you get attention, that's the goal, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
And then you learn that later.
Yeah.
So I did that set. I don't think I did a set again for 7 years.
Okay.
7 or 8 years. And I did that set because there was a show coming to town that was auditioning folks. For an MTV show. And I did improv at that time. When I got out of college, I auditioned for an improv troupe. What's funny is, it's weird because, I don't talk about these things out loud to myself. That same roommate I had, I was friends with later on and became roommates with him all over again after I graduated school. And I remember him saying, I've been going to see this improv troupe. And I was like, I did some improv in high school. When I say I did some, we did like a 6-week session on it or something.
Yeah.
And he said, there's this really pretty girl in this troupe. So when I saw that they were auditioning in, I think, at the back of the Chronicle or something, I thought, well, I'll go audition and maybe I can meet this girl. Mm-hmm. I'd never even seen the troupe. I'm just like, he just said there was a pretty girl there. I know that sounds really creepy in this day and age of online stalkers and microaggressions or whatever. Really what it was is when I graduated from college, I moved to near like Oak Hill and 183, and which is now sort of the center of Austin. But at the time, that was, I can't explain to you how far out of the city that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck. So, you didn't, there was no seeing anybody or meeting anybody. There was nobody out there. I just happened to pick up a room in this house that was affordable. It was families with kids. There were no bars out there. There were nowhere to meet anybody. And then going downtown, driving 25 minutes, and then drinking, and then driving 25 minutes was a no-go. And there wasn't the incredible built-in public transportation system we have now. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic. So I was doing this improv, and I heard that they were auditioning, but they were only auditioning stand-ups. So I signed up, and I did the same thing I did before, which is I wrote a stand-up set sort of the day of. But in the meantime, I had fallen so much in love with stand-up that when I was doing improv, at the time, there was an improv show at the Velveeta, and we did a show on Thursday, 2 on Friday, and 2 on Saturday. And so then after our show on Thursday was the open mic. And then the Velveeta used to run very differently than it runs now. They just ran acts kind of all evening because it was, it was a Bourbon Street. And they didn't run proper shows, maybe how they do now. Mm-hmm. And so I would do my show, and then I would stay and I would watch 10 stand-ups perform. Then I'd do another improv show, and then I would watch another 10 or 12 stand-ups perform. I did that every weekend for 2 years. Okay. So, add that up. So that's 40, roughly 50 sets a weekend times 50. We see where we're getting up here. So I watched a whole lot of sets before. So I kind of had an idea. And it was much better when I did the audition. Well, still wasn't a good audition, right? And that's it. I'm putting a period on that.
Okay.
That's the next time I did stand up. I auditioned for that show. The woman I auditioned for did not like me, even though the part had been written for me. Then I got a second audition just because the guys who had written the part for me said, well, let's audition him again. And that time, instead of being in an uncomfortable room with a casting agent who didn't like me, I was in a hotel room with the producer and the director of the show, plus 2 writers from the show, plus the 3 principal cast members. So I had an audience. Mm-hmm. And then I had a really good audition. And then they ended up taking, we did a pilot, I had a part that I auditioned for, which is a small part. They ended up liking the character that I built so much that they changed the whole story for that character to build him into. And that felt great. Yeah. And then that show lasted 13 weeks. It was a very short time in my life. It was a great time, but it was over and done with.
Yeah. And, it is held in high regard because it is not only because you continue to be a presence in the Austin comedy scene, people kind of tag you to that show, and how long of a career you've had, and the successes that you've built, but also because it harkens back to a time when Austin was so different.
Austin was different. I hate to be that guy. It's like, oh man, the armadillo, you see so much cooler back then. It was just very different, and I feel a whole lot of compassion, if that word even fits, for comics who are doing stand-up in Austin now, because when I was doing stand-up, you could live in this city for $800 a month, let's say. That includes rent, bills, food, your car insurance. There were so many things that could be paid for that amount of money. And so one of the things that you could do is, I went years in this city without a job. And what happened is you thought, well, I'm coming up on the end of the month. I need $250 to pay rent. And you went and picked something up. Does that make sense? You kind of had feelers out all the time in the comedy community, and somebody would say, hey, my boss needs a warehouse cleaned. It's a 12-hour day, but it'll pay you $100 at the end of it. And you're like, okay. And you went and you did whatever, and then you got $100 under the table, and then you went and worked the door at the Velve, and you got $70 there, and you maybe you worked the weekend. You know what I mean? There was a way to hustle money. That you can't do that anymore, and that maybe that's good because it keeps people more motivated. We were very free spirits back then, but it's also,
I think you and I both talked to enough comics to know that it can be oppressive. That you can't live in the city, you can't afford to live in the city, and there's so many open mics that you don't pay, you don't get paid for open
Right.
mics, so you've got to have the day job, or else you can't really live in Austin. So
that's true. And I always tell people, I feel like you should have a job that's either comedy adjacent or comedy friendly. Comedy adjacent meaning like if you're a copywriter at an ad company, an agency, then you're at least doing something and using your brain and creatively writing all day. Or have a job that is comedy friendly, meaning it's a place where if you have to take a week off, they're like, yeah, we don't, waiting tables or whatever, something like that. Yeah. But I feel for people when they get into something that doesn't fit either of those because it's not good for what we do.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, you finish your 13 weeks with Austin Stories in the 99?
97. Oh. It was the summer and fall of 97.
Okay.
In 98, they reshowed the show and they had us in a hold. It was nice because the head of MTV left to go to NBC. She was talking about trying to buy the show to bring it over to NBC. Rolling Stone, Details, TV Guide, everybody was hailing our show as this critical darling. Yeah. They all loved the fact they were like, it's the most poorly acted, poorly conceived show, and we love it.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there was no Arrested Development. There were no single camera television shows on television at the time. They were all in studios, and they were shot 3-camera style, whatever. We were shooting this on 16 millimeters so that it looked like Slacker or some kind of homemade film. That was the whole point of it.
Yeah.
And part of it was we wore our own wardrobe. We had our own haircuts. And because they wanted this feeling of, oh, this is made low budge by some college students. And what's funny is the show did very well outside of the city. Inside the city, people despised it and hated it because Austin likes to claim. Everybody in Austin likes to decide that they know what Austin is and nobody else is supposed to. So they were just, fuck MTV. They don't know Austin. This isn't what Austin's like. And it's like, well, this is what our Austin. I mean, these are so autobiographical, these stories, that you can't say that it's not Austin. Also, if we have a story about a young African-American single mother who's trying to get her 2 children to school, that's still an Austin story. Now, Austin doesn't want that to be their story because I don't know if you noticed, but Austin doesn't think that there are any people of color in the fucking city or whatever. Right. But those are still so. But I also understand the point of we all like to don't ruin our good time. Don't tell everybody what my favorite band is. Don't ruin the party.
Yeah.
But when I lived here, it was kind of brutal because when you weren't at work at the studio and the show was airing, if you went we would go to 6th Street, it was a lot of harassment. Just people like, hey fucking assholes, you fucking asshole. Or every bar I went into, when you would go to the urinal, someone had written fuck MTV, fuck Austin Stories above it. So it was, you just got really, you at some point you're like, ugh. Wow. And I think that's why a lot of the guys bailed to LA so quickly, because in LA, the first time I went to LA, I went to a party at the Directors Guild, and I don't know that anybody knows me, because here I'm going to CVS and I'm never recognized while I'm in my own city. And I go to LA, but there people are trained to look for people, I guess, or whatever. And I went to a party and I was just excited because it was going to be free food and I was hungry. and people were walking to me like, hey, Matt, how are you? And I was like, fine. I was like, I'm rolling the Rolodex. Like, who is this person? I don't know this person. Who is this person? And realizing after a while, they're introducing themselves to me, but they just know my name. And the amount of attention you get out there was kind of addicting and also kind of invigorating, because like, here I'm a quantity, useful.
Yeah, and the urinals are a little more friendly, I would say. There's no and so they held us in a holding pattern, and then they ended up, and they said we were developing a second season, and we started working toward that, and then after. And they paid us, well, I didn't because I was too low on the road, but they paid a holding fee to the main cast members. Now, the woman who had left for NBC had a long-standing feud with the guy that took over, as I hear the story. And he didn't want any of her shows. And also in understanding of that business, too, when you were younger, you took it really personally. And then you understand, MTV is a stepping stone that you don't go to end up at MTV. It's where you go as a network head to try to become a network head of something else. Right.
And so it doesn't do you much good to run somebody else's shows. You really want to get your own stuff out there. So we were replaced by sock puppets. Unfortunately, we were replaced after we couldn't be cast in other shows that year, and I got invitations, but I had a contract that didn't allow me to go audition for other shows. So then pilot season is over, and then the show isn't on air for a year, and then when pilot season comes around, that's when I finally was out there. But it's a town of, are you hot right now? Does that make sense?
Right.
And suddenly all that interest had dried up, and then it was kind of an uphill battle of go into these auditions and all of that. The fun that I had at parties before really had kind of disappeared.
So even in the course of 1 year,
Gone.
that's how fast
Gone.
the flame can...
Gone, yo.
Wow.
Yeah. I think if you're a really big show, I think it's probably different. Mm-hmm. But we were, like I said, a very small niche show. Think about it. It's fall of 97 all the way to spring of 99. Mm-hmm. That gives you so much more time to see so many other faces that you want to put in your shows,
Right.
So that's what happened there.
Yeah. It's really interesting that something that you said really early on about how you don't really work that hard. You just think about the cool stuff that you want to do. So you've gone through that experience now. That 1 year passes up. You're not getting picked up for auditions, and in your mind and this philosophy that you articulated and that I'm seeing in action through many of the things that you've talked about so far. Well, that's just not a cool thing to do anymore, to be in LA, right? Was that
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think you think it's not cool to be in LA?
No. For you, because of this particular experience of after the year being on hold, and then
I went to LA, and then that year was pretty tough. I also have, back then I didn't really know how my brain worked, and I had I've been kind of open about it. I've got a lot of I have a speech impediment, is what I'm trying to say. I have issues with depression, and at the time I didn't realize that that's what was necessarily going on. I just thought it was the doldrums and the blues or whatever.
Yeah.
But the time out there wasn't very... I got hooked up with a very big management company, a huge management company. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I tell some newer comics, they get excited about, a manager's interested in me. And I never want to tell anybody what to do. All the decisions should really be their own. They should own their decisions and feel good about them. But when I try to give advice to people, I say, I ask why. Why do you want a manager? That's what because I used to tell people, you don't want a manager. You know what I mean? And then I realized I don't want to be the bossy guy. I've just started asking people, but why? When they tell me, I'm moving to LA, I'm moving to New York, why? Mm-hmm. And I find that most people have a hard time articulating the why, other than, because then it would be a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's not a good reason to make business decisions, is because it would be cool. Right. And what happens too, especially in Austin, and this is going to sound like I'm belittling people, and I'm not, because I made the same decisions when I was younger. Sometimes people can really start to beat their head against a wall here. You feel like, I'm not progressing at all. I'm not getting on the shows that I want. I'm not getting the weekends that I want at Cap City. I'm not getting the festivals I want. I'll move to New York. You're laughing because you know where I'm headed with this. And I've asked some people, like, well, why is that where you're having a struggle here in a place that's honestly a much smaller pond, and the current against you is not as strong.
Right.
And you're saying, well, I'm not getting the things I want here, so I'm going to go to a place that's even more brutal and go do it. Now, I will also say no comic should ever not go to LA or New York for some period in their career. You can't, I don't know that you can become a comic and not have gone there and seen what goes on there and deal with the industry and all those things. That it helps set your brain.
Right.
I didn't really start doing stand-up until I left LA. And that kind of was a bit of it certainly felt like a failure, whether it was or not. It turned out to be a pretty good thing for me, but it certainly felt like a failure. And when I was back here, I was at the Velveeta nursing my wounds, and someone was like, hey, you should go up there. And I was like, because at the time when I was doing Austin Stories, I started doing more and more stand-up.
Okay.
emceeing shows and hanging out with my friends and trying to build a little set. But I was not a good comic. Just was not good. I think I was clever and I had some funny thoughts, but I was a bad comic. There's a difference between what happens too is people, especially people that come from like an acting background, is they try to act like their idea of a stand-up.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because as I'm thinking, I'm like, well, you were doing improv in high school. You were doing a lot of improv. You you were acting on the show, why weren't you a good comic? You had this
Go watch.
performance.
You can watch a lot of comedy.
Yeah.
You can pick out. We won't use names here, but you can pick out acts where you'll see that, like, oh, they're pretending to be a comic right now. Sorry, I'm popping my peas on your filter. They're pretending to be a comic right now. They have a sing-songy, or it seems like they're presenting jokes to you. Not that they're being themselves, right?
Yeah.
There are comics in town that you know are very much like, you're like, oh, that's real. That's coming from a very you place.
Yeah.
And that's when you start figuring that out, you start to become a much better comic, because then you can take anything. People say, "Oh, you're really good with crowd work." Well, no, it's just that once you figure out how to be you, then any subject in the matter, you know how to rhythm, and you know how to deliver, and they may not all be killers, but you know how to build a little bit of material on stage and get away from your script, because you're not presenting the character that is your comedy.
Yeah.
And the people that have that, especially the ones that have it really young, I'm super, super envious of. The people that have figured it out really
Do they
in a
have
hurry.
good parents? Is that what it is?
I don't think it's different for every single person. But some people just get it. Some people just get it. And I did not. But I remember this one night, it was a comic named John O'Connell. I don't know if you know John, but he was just like, "You're going to go up there tonight?" I was like, "Nah." And he's like, "Just go up. It doesn't fucking matter." And I'd had a couple drinks, and it was a bad night. And I was like, "Oh, I'll just go screw off." And that set went amazingly well. It was the first time I had that feeling, too, of like not trying to really force jokes, and the nervousness of, will this, there's a thing that happens when you're starting. You're nervous through the entire delivery of the setup, waiting to get to the punch. Or you know that only your punches are funny, and you don't like the not laughter, so you rush through all your... there are comics in town that I know, I won't say them by name, who rush, and then deliver a punchline, and then sit there. And they're like, "Well, I don't know why that set didn't work that well." Because we couldn't understand a word you were saying in the panic to get to the laugh. But that set went really well. And I didn't know exactly why it went well, and it wasn't like, oh, something clicked, and then I became wildly successful beyond my dreams. It just, that was the first one, and then I caught the real bug. It was no longer like that stand-up was a scary thing that I wasn't that good at. It was, wow, that was spectacularly fun, felt great, and started really working the open mics a lot more in working jokes. And I found out that I was someone who ended up doing a ton of writing on stage. So I would have some ideas, but it was generally the really bad Velveeta nights, Saturday late show. You're headlining, and at the time the headlining I think was like 15 minutes, and a horrible audience. And I was like, I'm not wasting jokes, and I'm just going to talk. And you would end up
interesting.
You'd end up crushing on just some random stuff.
Yeah.
You didn't have recorders back then. You didn't have phones, so you feverishly ran off stage and tried to write down some of the ideas that you had talked about on stage. And some of the comics back then, a lot of times, would write stuff down for you. They'd be like, "Hey, dude, this is what you were saying on stage last night," because they knew you can't really, your brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And that was great. That was a service I guess we all had for each other. You got off stage and someone handed you notes like, "Dude, this killed. Look at what you did. This is great. This thing here."
Yeah.
I don't see it as much anymore. But
Well, yeah, you got the recording devices.
I guess so. Everybody's on their own.
Yeah. So I've got this question in mind because it comes up fairly often, and you just hit on the idea that you would just write on stage. But I've also heard this philosophy of don't waste the time that you have on stage. Go up there knowing what you need to do. And you also made the comment that you hadn't really figured yourself out yet before that little light bulb moment happened. So to me, what I'm hearing is, I went from trying to do something that was well scripted, well written, and go up there and just didn't feel it, to, okay, I'm just going to go up there and talk. And now I feel really good about this. So from that light bulb moment, is that when you started figuring yourself out to know, I just found it? Because it wasn't...
I still didn't have a voice, like my voice, for years after that. It still took a while. I mean, I was a mimic. I mimicked other comics that I liked. You see that still too. I would, I like this comic. I like the response he's getting. I'm going to kind of mimic how he does comedy. Oh, I like this comic. I like how she gets laughs.
Yeah.
I'm going to mimic how she gets laughs. And I did a lot of that because it's a crutch. You don't have confidence in yourself yet.
Yeah.
Eventually you get there. Yeah. And are you the question you're getting at is, should people write on stage or should they develop off stage? Or
well, it's actually not even that. And we can certainly address that, but I'm looking at time horizon because 2002 was your year to win the FPIA. And I'm just working through the chronology of the Austin stories. You come back from LA.
Helped run a comedy theater here in town.
Okay.
Called Bad Dog Comedy Theater, which was
that's
horrible nightmare, and is still, I think, the lowest point of my life. I don't like to talk about it at all. And then when that was done, that ended, I think I was out of there at 2000. And then I think that theater finally closed in 2001. But I remember doing Funniest Person. I did Funniest Person 4 times, I think, over a 5-year period.
Okay.
Did not do very well the first 2 times I did it. And I remember feeling a little rebuffed because I thought, well, I was better than a lot of the people up there tonight. And then you learn more about the business and how... there's the contest. You and I are recording this right now. Who knows when the people will listen to it? But we're recording this. We haven't even been a full week since the contest.
Yeah.
And this year's contest has had all kinds of bubble up, and people are like, oh, because the name of the contest is the Funniest Person in Austin contest, and that name in its own creates problems every year when someone wins because some people don't agree.
Yep.
If it was called the Austin Comedy Contest, I think the majority of the gripes about the contest would disappear overnight.
Yeah.
Because they would say, oh, I didn't win the Austin Comedy Contest, which is what it is.
It's a snapshot, yep.
The thing is that I hear people go, well, how can that be the funniest person? And it's like, well, that's the name of the contest. It is a comedy contest, and competitive comedy is just already the dumbest fucking thing in the world. It's subjective. Yeah. It's subjective. If you want to have a real comedy contest, then the finals would have to be 3 nights, and you would have to perform your same set or whatever set you wanted to over 3 nights, and the judges would judge you as a comic over a 3-night period, and not even 3 nights in a row. Maybe a Monday, a Wednesday, and then in front of a hot Friday crowd, and then they would make a decision about who's the funniest person out of that 12 people that made it to the finals. That's how you would do it if you really wanted to get to drill down on it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
But what it is, it's just a contest. Yeah. It's a fucking contest. Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with where you're drawn in the order and how you do and how you respond to the comic that was right in front of you and how the comic right after you responds to how you did. There's so many factors that you can't control. And it enrages people. And this is it sounds weird and gloaty, but this is sort of my favorite period because everyone licks their wounds for about the next 10 days. And then people go, well, fuck that. I'm going to show them. And then you start seeing really amazing work happening over the next 2 months.
Yeah.
Then people start to finish that. And then around January, people go, all right, here's kind of what my set's going to be. And they start working on that set, sort of, roughly.
Yeah.
But there's generally a lot of really good writing starts happening here in the next 2 months.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I did, and I think I was doing sets at I was working at the Velve again after the Bad Dog shut down, and then did the contest, and after I won the contest, really started going on the road as much as I could, and did that till about 2006 or 7 or 8 or something, somewhere right, yeah. So about 5 years, I think, that I was doing a lot of road. And got to do Comedy Central, which was fun. Got to do a couple of other television spots. Got to do some really cool comedy festivals. Enjoyed what I was doing. I had a goal of a number that I wanted to make, a money number I wanted to make, which I'd made in my last year. I was very excited. Very excited. Not a great number for raising a whole family, but a number where you could make a living. You could make a living. I could live in Pflugerville and still buy a house and stuff. But it required me to be on the road a whole lot, which wasn't good when the kids showed up.
Yeah.
And luck have it, while I was trying to figure out what the fuck am I going to do, and was trying to put together, get this, my first resume ever in my life at 36, I don't remember how.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, well, imagine how horrifying it is to try to put together a resume and with that kind of work history. I had tons of... I'd always been busy. Yeah. I directed a documentary. I worked on all kinds of films. I did all kinds of PA work. I had worked for a dirty video game company. I had done so many things.
Yeah.
But it's a really weird-looking work history, and I thought, what am I going to do? And the phone rang, and it happened to be... the guys from the radio who said we were looking for someone to come in. We want to audition you for a couple months, see how you fit. That was 8 years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Yeah.
25, 30-minute nutshell.
All right. Well, we're done.
We don't have to. Are we done? No,
we're not
wrap
done.
it up.
No. I really am intrigued by this theme of you just wanting to do cool stuff, and you have certainly talked about a lot of the cool stuff that you've done. By the way, it's the Dudley and Bob with Matt morning show.
That's true. They added the with Matt.
Yeah,
I think that was to keep me from leaving. Cool. Yeah,
smart guys.
Well, it was funny as I didn't want my name on there because then I had to own some of the stuff that I didn't like being said on the show. Does that make sense? When there were things said where I was like, things that were said that would make me cringe. Yeah. I come from just a slightly different generation than my co-hosts, right. So some things were like, ugh, that is not. Yeah. We shouldn't say that. You could hide before when your name isn't on there. So we'll see.
Well, we could spend probably a whole other hour just talking about that.
Tonight's my day off. I don't want to talk about that.
Right. The Punch show and the legacy that it has in Austin, one of the things that you're always very clear about the Punch show is it's a show that you would want to watch.
Yes.
It's not just, picking comics that you think will play well with an audience on a Tuesday night, which is, a rare thing. I mean, when you started Punch 7 years ago, I know is it 8th
2010.
season?
2010.
Okay.
And we do 3 seasons a year.
Okay.
As I call them, because we have to have a break for the contest. Mm-hmm. And then I like to have a break at the end of summer because it's always kind of a dead month and I just need a break from it. It's really, really, really hard to book and run and maintain a show and promote it. Yeah. It's hard. It sucks. I don't like it at all. I do not like it at all. I also despise hosting. And it's become the only role that I really have in the city. I don't get to perform stand-up a whole lot. I'm known as a good host, so when things roll around like Moon Tower, I end up being asked to host 3 shows at Moon Tower. I'm happy to be a part of Moon Tower. I've been very fortunate. I have friends who get left off every other year or whatever, and that's no fun. Yeah. So I'm always appreciative of everything I can get, but I do not like hosting. But I think it's sorry, you don't think you got to a question. I interrupted you.
And I've already forgotten what my question is. Well, that it was a show. It's a show that you would want to watch.
That's right.
So it's not...
And I do watch a lot of times.
For a lot of people, though, when they say, I'm going to start a show, and that there's this crazy boom in the comic scene
I haven't noticed. I haven't noticed.
Really?
No. Well, Are there a bunch of useless shows around the city?
Have you heard of this website called Last Gas Comedy?
I have. I'm quite familiar with it. Quite familiar with it.
All the shows. Flyers, the whole thing. So there's this boom, and I will sit with a comic, and I hear this, that, I really want to host a show. I really want to do a show. And so when you were talking earlier about, I don't really set formal goals for myself. Some of these people are setting goals for themselves as opposed to you just want to have a show that you would watch. It's very different.
I begrudgingly agreed to do Punch. I'll be honest with you. I very begrudgingly agreed to do Punch. I was asked to host basically like an open mic, except they wanted it to be called the Matt Bearden Show, and they wanted me to have an open mic and then headline all of them.
You would have none of that.
They wanted to do like 4 of them. And I said, no, absolutely not. It sounds horrible. And I had been kicking this idea around of Punch. It was a different show before, but that's why it's why it got called Punch, is that I had there was this other thing I was trying to do that I'm not even going to get into it because it's convoluted. But when I started doing stand-up and I came up, running a show was an admission to the scene that you weren't good. The goal was to be on the road. The goal should still be to get on the road.
Yeah.
The road is harder, the money's terrible, and it is brutal. But if you want to be a better comic, you should be on the road. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of I just did this on another podcast. Is it okay if I kind of rehash?
I listened to that podcast.
And I'll do it. And I'll do it in a truncated version because I know that you probably have some overlap in your listenership. But to run your own show was an admission to the scene. I can't get on the road, so I'm not getting booked enough at Cap or Velveeta. So I'm going to create some stage time for myself. Yeah. It was transparent. People knew what you were doing. And would we go out to those shows? Sure, because a little bit. But those shows always lasted 5 or 6 weeks, and then the whatever bar had agreed to it was like, this is terrible, and stopped. There are people, and I would ask them the same question. When they say, well, I'm going to start a show, I would say, why? And I want a truthful answer. Most of the time, it's because it's self-gratifying for them. That's it. And that's not a good reason to start a show. And it shows. It shows, and what I don't get, and it infuriates me, and I know that I'm probably in the minority here, is when someone starts a new show and you start a show at 9:30 on Thursday. The Velveeta has run an open mic at 9:30 on Thursday for 30 years, all right? That used to be the lifeblood of the city. Mm-hmm. When you go up and you compete against something where everyone from the scene should be going out and seeing, but the list is so full now, I can't get on. You don't have to perform stand-up to learn about stand-up. When I go to Cap City has always allowed comics to come in and if there are seats available, to sit in the back and watch an act. Yeah. When I go now, I still go out to see stand-up on Fridays and Saturdays. I sit in the back. I don't see another single fucking comic back there. Now, maybe they're all at another show. Who knows? I don't say that's not true. There are. You know what? I do see people, and you know who they are? They're the ones that are all generally, you can probably mention their names because they're all kind of at the top of the scene because they realize that you can learn stand-up by watching stand-up. You don't have it, and those people will probably go further, in my opinion. There are people who sometimes start one show, and then another show, and then another show, and I see that they collect shows. Like somehow, well, that's my credit. Mm-hmm. That's my credit. Now, a lot of these shows, to be fair, I don't go to a lot of them, and I could be wrong in my assessment. And I'm putting that right out there, right here, and saying I could absolutely be wrong. But I know that when I ask about them to other people, hey, how's this show doing? I don't hear from people, oh, it's fantastic, you should really go and check it out. There's some amazing work happening there. Mm-hmm. And it's because there are other things. That you should have a dedicated stage. You should have a mic that works. The mic should not be run through a guitar amp. There's all these things that I feel like that I think that they cheapen the scene. I think they cheapen what we do. Yeah. I think that they are detractors from the scene. And I get it if you're saying, well, there's so many acts now and stage time has become precious. But comedy has always been a meritocracy. Earn your fucking way in. Yeah. I know that sounds very cruel to say that, and it doesn't sound welcoming. And I'm sorry and people can say, well, you're in a point of privilege to say that, and yes, I recognize that, but I also recognize that I don't think that a lot of these shows are doing a great service for our scene. Now, I also don't know if they're doing a great disservice either. I don't know how many people are at a bar and then the stand-up show happens and they go, wow. And I've changed my mind there on that because I used to feel like anytime that happened, people say, well, I thought there was supposed to be a good scene here and this looks really bad. Now I've changed my mind and thought, if there are 30 people there, 30 people walking away with I don't know that that's going to change the scene for us now. We got 1 million people here, so I shouldn't panic about that. Yeah. But so I didn't want to start a show because of that reason. Mm-hmm. And then when I finally decided I was going to start a show, I told Margie, I said, she wanted me to try to capitalize on the fact that I was on radio and see if that could bring in some numbers. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be quite honest, I think that's why she reached out to me. Yeah. And I said, well, I want to do it, but I want to host the show. And there was some back and forth there. And I also said, I want it to be in the small room only. As we started growing, she was like, well, you're starting to sell out. Let's move to the big room. And I was like, no, I want to, because there was a very particular style of show that I wanted to build. And I don't want to sound negative. All along the way, Margie and everyone, all the staff at Cap City has worked tremendously well with me. They've all been super awesome and easy to work with for the most part. And and so I wanted to build a show, and that's where I sat down because the shows that we did have were, and this is going to sound critical, and I know that I'm going to step on some toes here, but a lot of the shows that were being booked kind of haphazardly. There was a show called, at the time, I think, Mishmash at Cap City, and it was just sort of like, we forgot to book this, let's get 12 acts up there. And or let's get 15 acts up, and it was just sort of whoever responded to an email the fastest. And they were sometimes you'd have a really good rhythm going, and then you'd have 5 really bad comics in a row that killed the show. So I started making a point of saying, here's who I want as my headliners. Who is a really good setup person for the headliner? Who's a really good setup person for that person? And then who would be a really good person to follow after me and then would dovetail into that? Because I wanted the whole evening to work well. Mm-hmm. That's getting harder to do now because our scene, the whole, comedy is as a whole, if you get online, is now very much about numbers and equality and microaggressions and privilege and all these other words that I am trying to do a very good job of listening and understanding. I don't agree with all the arguments. I'll be honest about that. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with all the arguments. But I also believe that to be a good showrunner, I need to at least hear the arguments and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think they're coming from a general frustration that whenever we're frustrated about how our comedy is going and how our progress is going, we look for something to be upset and angry about. I understand that because I had that same thing when, I was doing very well and I even had like some Comedy Central credits and I was not getting the bookings that I wanted or thought I deserved. Mm-hmm. And then I learned, well, there's just other powers in the industry and that's how it works. But so I understand where the desire for that comes from. I don't always agree with the finding of what's holding me back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to do this politically.
Yeah.
Politically. Yeah. So I know that no one's ever said this to me directly, but I'm not stupid. I know probably some people have thought, well, because for a long time I booked, all of my headliners were only male. I book a particular style of show for a particular type of audience. And if you fit into that style and you fit where you can entertain that audience, you are absolutely going to be booked. Mm-hmm. And then I need my closers to have a very certain energy. And if you perform that energy, I will absolutely book you. I really do not care your political leanings, your gender, your sex, any of that. I don't. And I will defend that. And I know that some people say, well, you're just being defensive. We're never going to win. We're never going to come to a conclusion on that. But I will say that if as some people have said, well, why the fuck did you book that guy? We don't like him. Like the comedy community, we don't like him. I said, because I don't like his stand-up. But he performs what I need for my show. And that's what I've booked people before that I'm not a huge fan of their stand-up, but I know that their set works well where I want to put it. Mm-hmm. I've also have some friends in town who I find very funny who have never booked for Punch in 7 or 8 years or whatever it's been now. I don't feel good about that, but they've not consistently delivered what works for that spot. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
So you've got a vision that you're trying to uphold.
Now you'll probably see some. Now that being said, I think you'll see a lot of differences now, and I feel like it's almost. People go, oh, he's finally booking more, more broadly. Uh-huh. And I don't think that's true. I think what's happening is some people who look different than skinny white guys are finally rising to the call, what. And I know that when I'm saying that, now that that's out of my mouth and I can't put it back in, I know that when some people listen to this, it's going to upset them, and they're going to say, what the fuck? I'm not saying that you weren't pursuing that. I'm saying that some people, and what's happened is now a ton of people have, and it's really making booking. I'm booking right now for the summer season, and it's what I'm looking at. I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much easier than it has been in the past because I don't have to go back to the same 7 people and try to rotate them through here. So many people are learning how to close a show, and what's happened is for a lot of comics, they're confused and they think, well, I have 40 minutes, so I am a closer. Or I've closed this show over here. Yes, you have closed that show over there, but that show is a different vibe than the show that we book. Yeah. And that's just the matter of fact. My audience tends to not be 18. The median age tends to be probably about 30, 35. And then also I skew older than on most of the other shows that I see. I can look into my crowd and see lots of 21-year-olds, but I also see 50 and 55-year-olds and sometimes 60-year-olds, and I don't want them to not have a good time. Yeah. So sometimes someone who's very funny, but all of their references are about Alt-J or Caribou or Levitation Fest. That does not work for that particular. So I'm looking for people who can tell a joke and tell it broadly, even if it's about a very narrow subject, tell it to where people can understand it. And when people learn that skill set, as soon as they do, I get them booked in. I know that sounds defensive. There's no way for me to say it without sounding defensive, I guess, but I'm also just trying to be transparent about how I book or whatever.
One of the things that I know you'll deny this, but I think a lot of people look at you as the steward of Austin comedy.
I will deny that, but go ahead.
I knew you would. Yeah. And part of it is because you have an articulate vision of what comedy is and can be, and like it was very nuanced to me as you were describing the notion of a comic saying, "Hey, I've got 40 minutes. I'm a closer," but somebody who really understands comedy and how it can be effectively delivered knows that you have to be able to craft a 40-minute set to really bring the house down.
Yeah.
And you know this, but you're just it's so frustrating.
Look, I remember. Look, there's nobody who would deny that Chris Cubis was a funny guy the minute he got to this city. All right.
Yeah.
And now Chris may argue with what I'm getting ready to say, and I would absolutely sit and listen with him. But he would also be arguing my subjective opinion, and that's going to be a hard place to get. Mm-hmm. But Chris was very, very funny, and Chris was one of my huge go-tos for Punch because he never didn't deliver. Mm-hmm. But I also, when I first started booking him in the first year or two, didn't see him as a closer. He had really, really funny jokes for 10 minutes, but there wasn't a build to it. And it didn't, when at the end of it, it didn't feel like there was a button and a bow and it came to a conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember the night. I remember where I was standing because Chris is someone I've always thought was hilarious and a star. I just flat out think that he has star quality all about him. Yep. And in my book, he can do very little wrong.
Yeah, we will both fight to the death anybody that says
otherwise. Absolutely. And there's a lot of comics that I feel that way about, right? And I'm glad that Chris is finally getting a modicum of the success that he has deserved for a long time. But I remember the night that he performed at Punch, and I was like, oh, he's done. I can't. He's done. I have to headline him the next time because he did a set that built and built and built and then it ended and it had a like all right and the problem was like oh fuck he just delivered that set in the middle and I know no one's going to follow that right now. I know no one's going to follow that right now. You know, and now I know when I'm booking Chris in certain positions because I don't always headline him. I put him in different positions. I know who I have to book behind him. It has to be somebody who can either ride that wave or is a good transition. If you get a very different energy right behind him, that's fine. Mm-hmm. You can go to Chris Cubis. You can go to someone who is, you could go straight into like an Amber Bixby, who has a very, and that's another thing too. When I've always booked Punch and people say, well, how come I noticed you booked, I look at, what's the word I'm trying to look for? It's not a diverse lineup, all right? And I think that sometimes people look at diversity purely by what color is this person's skin and what's between their legs. Mm-hmm. And I think that when I try to book diverse, but the diversity I'm looking for is in content and delivery and energy. And I have spreadsheets at home, and those spreadsheets are made up of, I have green-coded and blue-coded and red-coded, and those tell me, is somebody a hot energy? Is somebody a low energy? And then also movement. Like some people can have a low energy, but be a very focused and high energy comic. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
I'm thinking Aaron Brooks. That may not.
Sure.
Who's in your
Aaron Brooks or someone like I don't know if you did you go to the finals this year?
I did.
Did you see Michael Priest's set?
Oh God, yes.
Okay, that was a murderous set.
It was.
That was a home run set. Mm-hmm. Me personally, I was very disappointed to not see him finish in the top three. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't a judge, and I know how judging works. I've done it sometimes, and I know that it can be a cluster. But what I saw, and he didn't move.
Right.
He stood at a mic stand with a hat pulled over his eyes, and that may have hurt him because I don't know from the back. I talked to one of the judges after the show, and they said I didn't really understand all the jokes because I couldn't see his face.
You need to connect.
I needed to see his face, and I never could see his face from the back of the room. And I thought, oh. That's funny because to me, I was literally like second row, and I was thinking, this is one of the most monster sets I've ever seen at FBIA. And I said, I couldn't, I heard his jokes and I knew it, and I heard people laughing, but I didn't get what was happening. And if you couldn't see the kind of goofy little movements he makes in his face, I think a lot of his stuff got lost there in the translation. Yeah. But that, to me, now that's not a high energy set.
Right.
That's not him moving around and like, what's up, people, ladies?
It's the not Daniel Webb version.
Now, Daniel Webb is a polar opposite, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where where I'm trying to book in the diversity. I also try to make, I want that show, Punch, to grow the scene. And I don't think that you can have a good scene. And I've thought this from my very young age. I don't think you can have a good scene of all 30-year-old white male. I don't. And that is not something that I came along with because I read an article in Jezebel and was late to it. When I used to go to the Velveeta very early on, there were comics that made me laugh a whole lot. Rachel Arieff and Laura House and Stacy. God damn it, why am I not remembering your name right now, Stacy? of Scott and Stacy. They were women, and they made me laugh the hardest in the evening. So the idea of women aren't funny never fit into my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But what I did see is that women had to try to get laughs sometimes in different ways. And I think what happened to a lot of the women comics I saw is they thought, well, I have to get laughs by doing a particular type of humor. And that wasn't funny to me. And I think that's where sometimes women ain't funny came from.
Yeah.
I think it's very not true now in our scene. The problem we have is, when you're booking a show like Punch, and in the last year, 3 people really came online as very strong closers: LaShonda Lester, Maggie May, and Kath Barbadoro. They're gone. All 3 are now gone for me for different reasons.
Yeah.
But I don't. So, trying to find female closers so that you do on the surface have a little bit of diversity in your booking is hard, because what I think were the 3 strongest closing acts. I'm not. This isn't a judgment on funny or what, but for closer, who can have a 20-minute set. Also, when you're closing Punch, I'm waiting for checks to be resolved, which means I tell you're going around 20 minutes. I'll light you when the checks are good. That's a different skill set, of knowing I'm going to do a set, but it's not a planned set, and I don't know exactly when it's going to end. So some people come to me and say, I think I'm ready to headline. I say, well, I get that you say that, but I haven't. When I'm watching you, I don't see that. I see you kind of always working that same kind of set. I don't see you taking big chances and whatever. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Now I'm just talking off into one.
Yeah, I need to be very respectful of your time. And once again, this is a risk that I knew I was going to take by having you on. You refuse to talk about yourself. No,
I feel like that's all I've been doing is talking about myself. What are you talking about?
No, I know. No, going back to the steward thing, I think that is why you are so well regarded in the Austin community. Is you really do spreadsheets. You just spoke my
I only said that. I only said that to tease you. Yeah.
Well,
but yes, I've learned the joy of Google Docs. It helped me out a whole lot.
Just having such a knowledge of the scene, what works, having that kind of encyclopedic knowledge makes you an expert. And because you are so approachable and you don't play favorites. You have favorites, but you don't play favorites.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's the way I try to be.
Yeah.
I try to be that way. There are no comedy coaches. They don't exist.
Yeah.
There are people who pay money to take comedy classes, and that's generally from somebody who is a charlatan.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very frank about that. Most people become comedy coaches because it hasn't worked out for them. Yeah. If you're doing very well, you don't need to take the time to be a comedy coach.
Right.
Since there are no comedy coaches, we have to learn. Every comic is recreating the wheel every single time, and it is a very labor-intensive thing to do. Sometimes that's why I'm enjoying doing these podcasts too, is that you can get some of these thoughts out, but also all of my opinions about comedy and how you should do it, they all change over time. I think it's one of the reasons I'm hesitant to take out any kind of, when you say what people for a while were using terms that were superlatives in the same, and which I didn't like, because I know that my own opinion changes about things. So people say, well, you're a guider. You know the answers. I don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. Here's what I do. I have an opinion, and I'm happy to share it. But I know. I would also. I've never been to the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. I can tell you what not to do. I've auditioned, I think, 12 times for that festival, and have never. So I can tell you the things that didn't work, but I can't tell you how to get there. And people have come to me and said, "Well, what do I need to do?" Here's what I can tell you to do while you're there. I've been to festivals. I know what happens when you're approached by management. I know how you should handle yourself. I know what kind of writing sample you should take with yourself if you want to be treated seriously. But I can't tell you how to. Do you know what I'm saying? There are things that I have not achieved in my own career, so I don't know why. I think it would be wrong for me to wear the dean's hat, if you will. But I'm happy to share a lot of it. And then I also appreciate you. I like seeing comics succeed. And one of the things about comedy is we have a cool kids club, and then we have some people that are outside the cool kids club. Just because you're not in the cool kids club does not mean you are not funny. And I try to go find some of the kids who are in the not cool kids club and find funny, and then say, hey, I don't care whether you want to be in the cool kids club or not, but I would like you on my show that has a lot of the cool kids on it. And that's one of my, I like when I see fun. And the thing is when you've seen comedy now for 25 years or whatever, I can go to an open mic and I can tell if you're funny and you're coming from the right place. Even at a terrible mic.
Yeah.
Terrible mic, you're not getting laughs, but I can watch you and I know if that's going to work in my room. And then the other thing I look for is consistency. So I can go and people will tell me, you got to go see this person. You got to go see this person. I go to a show and they don't have a good set. And that's not a mark against they're funny. What it is a mark against is, they're not yet, they don't know how to work every audience. And the thing is about Punch, one of the reasons it works is I don't know a lot of people who leave and go, well, it was an okay show.
Yeah.
Most people go and they go, that was fucking awesome. And the reason we get to awesome is that I book people who all know how to if I'm 2 jokes in and this isn't working, I know how to pivot my set and change my set so that it ends up working. And that's an important skill set. And if you don't have it, I have a hard time booking you. Now, sometimes I might book somebody for a 5-minute set and I tell them, I want you to do this 5 minutes. That's always a weird feeling because I don't want to be your boss.
Yeah.
But I'm like, look, this is your best 5 minutes. And if you stick with this, I will give you a good setup person and a good follow person where even if you kind of tank it, no one will remember that you tanked it. That's the favor I'm doing for you. So you can relax knowing that you're not going to fuck up the show. Just go out there and do your stuff. And I tell people sometimes, don't try to write too much. Well, not write too much. There are comics that can. Don't try to do too much new. Hammock it, which means start with a great joke have a great joke in mind that you're going to finish with. And if you're going to try something new, at least get them on your side and then try new. Because sometimes people go right up into the new material, and it's like, no, make sure they love you first.
Yep.
Then they'll roll with that and then close strong, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I've been enjoying. I love the contest because that's when it's time for me to get to see a lot of acts. I used to have to go to every single show. Now, because of the beauty that is Dustin Swaylock, who is actually, when people talk about who is the steward of the scene and who keeps it together, he's the man. Don't look behind the curtain or whatever. He's the Wizard of Oz. He
really
is.
He
absolutely is.
Yeah.
Him, Mario, the staff at Cap City. Then I'll put myself down there. Right.
Wow.
But I'm lost my place. Trying to find those new acts, and I never want to be the guy who goes to someone and says, "Don't do that joke anymore," because I don't know how it feels to hear that. I know how it felt for me, and it sometimes made me uncomfortable because when I started comedy, I didn't care about the audience. I wanted my peers' acceptance really badly. Yeah. So when I would get off stage and the comics I really looked up to, I would ask them, "How was that?" And I realized that they had been talking in the back and nobody had watched my set. It hurt. It sucked. Yeah. It also gave me something to work towards. But I like seeing young. I say young. Sometimes I say young, and it's about 30 and 40-year-old people. What I guess I mean is young on the scene, if that makes sense. But an example is I think that there's a comic named Devon Walker who's super funny, and I like a whole lot. And I knew he was funny, and when I say this is why I'm hesitant. I don't want this to come. I don't want anybody telling Devon that I said that I discovered it. I didn't. You know what I mean? I just saw a comic and I was like, I like that guy a whole lot. Yeah. And I remember trying. I backdoored him into Moon Tower, not this past one, but the one before, because I got him on this Piranha show because I wanted the people that booked Moon Tower to see him because I was like, I think he's a different voice than we have in the city. Right? He looks different. Yep. From how most of our comics look, right? I'll say that right out front because that is out there. He sounds different than a lot of the comics because he's coming from a very different place. And then he has a very consistent and well-crafted look. He is a tall, handsome black man who always wears country and western T-shirts. Right there, straight. But that stands out. Like, that's a thing, right? That's a thing that you can book. And I immediately appreciated what he was doing. And he was fantastic. I don't know, were you at that Piranha show? I feel like you were there.
I was, yes.
And the way we do Piranhas, you don't know what the order's going to be. And I was worried for him because he had to close what had been a very, very awesome show. Yeah. And I was very worried for him because I invited the bookers and a couple of managers out to see that show, and part of it was because I wanted them to see him and make sure they get booked the next year. Do you know what I mean? And now I'm like, oh, have I put this person? Because at the time I think he was 7 or 8 months in.
Yeah, super new.
He was fucking awesome.
He was
awesome. And that's where when people try to give me credit and I don't like it because maybe I created an opportunity, but there's no way for me to make Devon funny in that position.
Right.
And there was a guy on stage who was being very ours was not a roast show, but someone didn't quite get the message. All right, he was very funny. It was Jesse Joyce, very, very funny, but he was brutally going after everyone. And Devon popped him right back, and it kind of shut Jesse up. And then Devon crushed us. It was so enjoyable, and it was such a great cap on that evening that I was just like, oh, this is awesome, you know. And then he got booked this year, and that was fantastic. If I want to take credit for anything, is maybe trying to create opportunities, but I don't write anybody's jokes. I don't perform their jokes for them.
Yeah.
I guess I can try to sometimes do good things for a scene, but it's the scene doing it. Yeah. That's why I don't like when sometimes when somebody's writing an article about Austin comedy will call me and want pull quotes from me.
Yeah.
And I'm so hesitant because I know how pull quotes are used, and I know how they're going to be set up, and I know that most of the scene, because this is a really small scene, it's not LA. In LA, nobody would give a shit because they know how the media works.
Yeah.
Here, they see a pull quote and they say, you know, Matt Bearden created the Austin scene. And then the pull quote is, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time and all the things I've accomplished. And then they follow up, well, that's not what I was responding to necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
And then somebody I know in a private group on Facebook somewhere is like, Bearden thinks he created a fucking scene. Fuck this dude, right? Like, so I try to be careful and aware that is something that can happen. Where I will maybe pat my own back is I've always tried to talk well about the scene. When I talk to industry from the scene, industry that comes to visit, I try to talk to them in a respectful way. Have you enjoyed your time here? What are some of the things that you did? And then I get around it. Who are some of the comics you've seen? Okay. And then who are some of the? And then if they have a bad take on somebody, I'm like, oh, did you get to see? And they go, yeah, I don't think he's ready. I go, you know what? I think you might have gotten a bad read on that guy. Because I see that guy could perform pretty consistently, and I think you should. I would hope the next time you're back, you give him a clean look. Because one of the things that happens in a booker's mind is once they've seen you once, they're done with you.
Yeah.
They're not.
It's that snapshot.
Comedy judges who are in the industry they're not your mom. They're not cheering for you to do well. So when they come to the contest, if they saw you last year and they didn't like you last year, they may not be paying attention to you this year. You have a one shot kind of thing, and that's. I guess one of the things that I try to be good for the scene in ways that I can there. I'm not going to be able to be good in the way where I have my own sitcom and I can reach back and try to hire people. That's not going to happen for me. At my age and the things that I've accomplished, that dream is gone. So I have to find other ways to try to help out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm hesitant when you say nice things or try to give me accolades. I honestly don't think that most of them are deserved. And I'm not trying to say that to be humble. I think if you're inside and you see how hard everyone else is working. So from outside, it may seem that way. And honestly, it's kind of just a default role for me because I'm the oldest guy who never actually accomplished anything. I mildly accomplished things. Does that make sense? Yeah. I never actually made it in any of the things I tried to do. So I have a lot of experience, and I can talk to them. I can speak to them.
You're on a fucking radio show. You host a show that everybody wants to go to.
They're good things. They're good things. But they look. I built a good show. Well, I built the mechanics for a good show. But Punch worked because the things I asked of comics, they did, and.
Because you have a good eye
for
it.
But they all own that. They all own that success. I won't back down from that.
You're the maestro. You're the maestro.
No, because I'm not directing a show. I'm not really directing a show.
But you know how to pick the closer. You know how to pick one person after the next to have a flowing show. You're the maestro.
I've put an architecture together that allows people to perform really well if they choose to, and they tend to 100% of the time choose to perform really well there, and it is a group effort. It's a group effort. I can see you making a face at me. That's how I feel about it. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. And I'm happy to say that. What you said at the very beginning of this, that I wanted to build a show that I would watch. And if you watch me on certain shows, you will see me like a proud papa.
Yeah.
leaned against the bar, and I'm watching. I'm forgetting that I'm hosting a show. I'm so absorbed into watching comics do well. And there are nights they're all going to have drinks, but I have to get up at 5 a.m, so I can't go have drinks. So I have to wait. I get people paid out. Then I tip out, and then I make sure, hey, do you guys need anything else from me? And the club is empty, and I leave, and I get in my car, and the parking lot is empty, and I take that entrance ramp up onto 183, and then the flyover on I-35 is my ride home. And then sometimes I just get this big smile because I'm like, that was really good and fun, and I got to be a small part of it, and then that feels great. Yeah. That feels great, and all of that exists because I'm awesome, and I'm the king of the scene, and I'm the best thing that ever fucking happened. Does that sound better? Is that what you were looking for? I didn't think so. See, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? It sounds horrible.
Stay the humble.
It is. It's really fun. It's really. It's an absolute blast to watch a lot of those shows, and those shows where I get that wrapped up into it are they feel great. They feel great. Yeah. And that's when sometimes there are so many headliners. Now, it's fun to book a punch show where I know I'm the weakest act. That feels fun. Even now, I can say that because of those other things you're talking about that I have. If I was still a struggling comic and beating my head, pounding it up against the ceiling and feeling like I wasn't getting anywhere, I wouldn't enjoy that feeling. It would be a horrible feeling. Yeah. And I think that's what happens for some comics where they feel really morose is the things that they want to happen for them haven't happened yet. I've had enough nice things happen, and I'm comfortable. And then you start to realize that other things in life are important. When you're single, everything's about comedy. Mm-hmm. I've got a good family, and there's other things happening. So it's like, I can salve my wounds in other places after bad sets. So
cool. Matt, you've been way generous with your time.
I thought you were going to say verbose.
No, you have been that for sure. But you're on a radio show for 4 hours a day on weekdays, so
once 8 years of training. Once it starts, you have a hard time slowing it down.
This episode may drop after your 2 upcoming new shows. Not new, they're annual. Well, I don't even know how to describe them. Sour Grapes is coming up.
Yeah, that'll be next in a couple days.
Yeah, which will be behind.
Sure.
It happened.
So it already happened, and it was fantastic.
It was absolutely fantastic. Premises, some of the people that didn't win or that didn't advance to the finals. What is the?
I've never booked anyone who made it to the finals. I feel like getting to the finals is reward in itself. And I used to not book really a lot of people that went to the semis, but. But I also book people who didn't make it out of the prelims, but I thought had pretty fantastic sets. Okay. There is a comic named Caitlin Feely.
That's right, Feeney.
I should know her name because I've booked her. Who had an incredible set that I got to see because Dustin, and I always tell Dustin, if you see something somewhere, send it to me immediately. I want to know. And
if you see something, say something.
Great set. Flabbergasted that it didn't advance. And there's a comic named Courtney Peterson that I'm very excited about. So a lot of these new acts, I kind of only get to see every once in a while. And then the great thing about the contest is I get to see them doing their best work, and then it's a really good time to judge them and see where they are. And so I'm really excited about some of the acts that I'm having on. And then after that's Piranha, yes. Which the conceit of that is someone is selling off the jokes they don't want anymore. Yeah. And other comics, air quotes, are buying those. I don't think anyone has ever used one of the jokes that they bought. But it's a takeoff of Shark Tank. Yeah. And it was something that originally, the original idea Margie from the club came up with. In the original way we were going to try to do it, I didn't think was going to work. So, but she's very kind of letting me put my hands and flavor all over something. So it's kind of a co-production, and I like it a whole lot.
Are we going to see more Piranha this year?
I hope that we'll see more Piranha. I like that show and would like to do it more often. Once Punch came back, it made it kind of harder to put Piranhas in there. Yeah. But we'll make time for it somewhere. Mm-hmm. We'll get it figured out because I like that show a whole lot. Yeah. It's fun, and I think there are enough comics now that are all writing enough that we could do it frequently.
Mm-hmm. And the return of Punch is happening
June 6th, and we'll run through June and July. This is actually the shortest Punch season that will ever exist because it was supposed to be 8 weeks. I was just informed yesterday that Rich, who books Cap City, wasn't paying attention to the calendar and booked somebody on a Tuesday. So, oops. So we're down to 7 weeks on a season, which I think before that, the shortest season was 12 weeks, 11 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So it's much, much shorter, which means a lot more people won't get booked in a season, and that many more people will have umbrage and think that I'm a fucking conceited prick. But that's okay. I've gotten used to that role.
Comes back in the fall.
And the fall will be a nice long, 15-week where we get to really see a lot of people, bring in a lot more people from out of town, stuff like that.
Nice.
And that's that, yeah, punchcomedy.com. Go there,
yes.
Find out about the show, buy tickets, go, unless you're a comic, and then you're always welcome to come for free, because I would never charge a comic for a show.
Take advantage. I also, as an audience member, I like to see that back wall.
That Comics Alley is one of my favorite things about that show.
Yeah.
I love seeing that Comics Alley when I have someone who's debuting on Punch, and I know that their friends are coming to see them do well, and then they fucking crush it, because I know what that feels like to root for your friend.
Yeah.
And those moments are my favorite.
Yeah.
They really are my favorite. That, and I also like when we bust each other's balls. I like when we I wish we did more of that, but some comics I don't think are very comfortable with it or whatever. But I like when we bust each other's balls from on stage and off stage.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, I like to ask closing question.
Here we go.
One word to describe your future.
Verbose.
I think that was your past, Matt.
It's my present. It's everything. It's all of it.
It is. Okay. Do you want to do any additional plugs? I think you covered just about everything. The website.
Dudley and Bob with Matt Show at klbjfm.com. Punch Comedy is really kind of where everything that I love and adore exists. And then because of where I think this will be coming out, we're having a benefit for LaShonda Lester, June 28th at Cap City Comedy Club, which is a Wednesday. And we are trying to raise as much money from the community as we possibly can. That show is not a memorial, per se. We won't be telling stories or what have you. That's not that there aren't fantastic stories to tell. It's that I want to invite... it's not a night for the comics. I want to bring people from the community who have money to give, and I want to take all of your money.
Yeah.
That's me being very frank about it. I want to book a show that people that are moneyed will come to, and I want to pull and tug at their heartstrings, and I want them to open up their purses and their wallets, and I want them to give as much as possible, because Shandi was very dear to all of us, and she left behind a husband and a son, and I want them to have an easier transition of what's been a very difficult time.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Go. It's Cap City, the 28th.
28th. I said that out loud, and now I'm panicked that I gave out the wrong date.
No, I've got it memorized too.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is a wrap on Comedy Wham presents Matt Bearden. Tell us again where we can find you on social media.
At Matt Bearden at the Twitter, and at Matt Bearden at the Instagram, and you search on the Facebook. I got to Facebook so late that all the young hip Matt Beardens have Matt Bearden over there. But
okay.
You can generally just Google and you'll find me. I'm very, very Googleable.
All right. We hope you've enjoyed learning about how Matt Bearden. I'm going to look up now so I can see the reaction. How Matt Bearden got to be the comedic genius that you heard today.
It's fucking dumb.
Just as much as I have. Be sure to visit ComedyWham.com. Give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at ComedyWham, and like our Facebook page. You can listen to past interviews on Stitcher, Google Play, and iTunes. And that has been Comedy Wham presents Matt Bearden. I'm Valerie, and that's been funny. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Val. I appreciate it.